to today's installment of Search the Scriptures. We're on study number 17 in the book of Judges, just one study to go. Today we are on Judges chapter number 20, and we're going to answer a couple questions here from Judges 20. The first one, Gibeah was a Benjamite city, and the men of Benjamin refused to deliver up their fellow tribesmen to justice. What is the relationship between loyalty to those whom we are connected, our family, friends, business associates, etc., and our loyalty to God and His commandments? And two, note the profound effect of on the tribes of the sin of the men of Gibeah. It stabbed the people awake to the degree to which moral declension had progressed among them. And can you discover other factors which show that some good came out of this sordid chapter of events? And the third question, how would you account for the fact that the 11 tribes were twice defeated by the Benjamites, even though they had asked counsel of the Lord? And what do you gather from chapter 20 and verse 23 about their attitude? And was it a sign of weakness or strength? Well, let's look at Judges chapter number 20 together. Remember, this is right after, in chapter 19, the concubine of the Ephraimite was cut up and sent to the 12 tribes of Israel after she'd been raped by the Benjamites in the Benjamite town of Gibeah. So let's look at Judges chapter 20, verse number 1. Then all Israel from Dan to Beersheba and from the land of Gilead came together as one and assembled before the Lord in Mizpah. And the leaders of all the people, the tribes of Israel, took their places in the assembly of God's people, 400,000 men armed with swords. The Benjamites heard that the Israelites had gone up to Mizpah, and then the Israelites said, "Tell us how this awful thing happened." So the Levite, the husband of the murdered woman, said, "I and my concubine came to Gibeah in Benjamin to spend the night. And during the night the men of Gibeah came after me and surrounded the house, intending to kill me. They raped my concubine, and she died. I took my concubine, cut her into pieces, and sent one piece to each region of Israel's inheritance, because they committed this lewd and outrageous act in Israel. Now all you Israelites, speak up and tell me what you have decided to do." And all the men rose up together as one, saying, "None of us will go home. No, not one of us will return to his house. But now this is what we'll do to Gibeah. We'll go up against it in the order decided by casting lots, and we'll take 10 men out of every 100 from all the tribes of Israel, and 100 from 1,000, and 1,000 from 10,000 to get provisions for the army. And then when the army arrives at Gibeah in Benjamin, it can give them what they deserve for this outrageous act done in Israel." So all the Israelites got together and united as one against the city. The tribes of Israel sent messengers throughout the tribe of Benjamin, saying, "What about this awful crime that was committed among you? Now turn those wicked men of Gibeah over to us, so that we may put them to death and purge the evil from Israel." But the Benjamites would not listen to their fellow Israelites. From their towns they came together at Gibeah to fight against the Israelites. And at once the Benjamites mobilized 26,000 swordsmen from their towns, in addition to 700 able young men from those living in Gibeah. Among all these soldiers there were 700 select troops who were left-handed, each of whom could sling a stone at a hair and not miss. Israel, apart from Benjamin, mustered 400,000 swordsmen, all of them fit for battle. And the Israelites went up to Bethel and inquired of God, and they said, "Who of us is to go up first to fight against the Benjamites?" And the Lord replied, "Judah shall go first." And the next morning the Israelites got up and pitched camp near Gibeah, and the Israelites went out to fight the Benjamites and took up battle positions against them at Gibeah. And the Benjamites came out of Gibeah and cut down 22,000 Israelites on the battlefield that day. But the Israelites encouraged one another and again took up their positions where they had stationed themselves the first day. The Israelites went up and wept before the Lord until evening, and they inquired of the Lord. They said, "Shall we go up again to fight against the Benjamites, our fellow Israelites?" And the Lord answered, "Go up against them." Verse 24, then the Israelites drew near to Benjamin the second day. This time when the Benjamites came out from Gibeah to oppose them, they cut down another 18,000 Israelites, all of them armed with swords. Then all the Israelites, the whole army, went up to Bethel, and there they sat weeping before the Lord. They fasted that day until evening and presented burnt offerings and fellowship offerings to the Lord, and the Israelites inquired of the Lord. In those days the ark of the covenant of God was there, with Phinehas son of Eleazar the son of Aaron ministering before it. And they asked, Shall we go up again to fight against the Benjamites, our fellow Israelites, or not? The Lord responded, Go, for tomorrow I will give them into your hands. Then Israel set an ambush around Gibeah, and they went up against the Benjamites on the third day, and took up positions against Gibeah as they had done before. The Benjamites came out to meet them, and were drawn away from the city, and they began to inflict casualties on the Israelites as before, so that about 30 men fell in the open field and on the roads, the one leading to Bethel and the other to Gibeah. And while the Benjamites were saying, We're defeating them as before, the Israelites were saying, Let's retreat and draw them away from the city to the roads. All the men of Israel moved from their places and took up positions at Baal Tamar, and the Israelite ambush charged out of its place on the west of Gibeah. Then 10,000 of Israel's able young men made a frontal attack on Gibeah, and the fighting was so heavy that the Benjamites did not realize how near disaster was. The Lord defeated Benjamin before Israel, and on that day the Israelites struck down 25,100 Benjamites, all armed with swords. And then the Benjamites saw that they were beaten. Now the men of Israel had given way before Benjamin because they relied on the ambush they had set near Gibeah, and those who had been in ambush made a sudden dash into Gibeah, spread out, and put the whole city to the sword. The Israelites had arranged with the ambush that they should send up a great cloud of smoke from the city, and then the Israelites would counterattack. The Benjamites had begun to inflict casualties on the Israelites, about 30, and they said, We are defeating them as in the first battle. But when the column of smoke began to rise from the city, the Benjamites turned and saw the whole city going up in smoke. Then the Israelites counterattacked, and the Benjamites were terrified because they realized that disaster had come on them. So they fled before the Israelites in the direction of the wilderness, but they could not escape the battle. And the Israelites who came out of the towns cut them down there, and they surrounded the Benjamites, chased them, and easily overran them in the vicinity of Gibeah on the east. 18,000 Benjamites fell, all of them valiant fighters. As they turned and fled towards the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon, the Israelites cut down 5,000 men. Along the road they kept pressing after the Benjamites as far as Gidom, and struck down 2,000 more. On that day 25,000 Benjamite swordsmen fell, all of them valiant fighters, but 600 of them turned and fled into the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon, where they stayed 4 months. The men of Israel went back to Benjamin and put all the towns to the sword, including the animals and everything else they found. All the towns they came across, they set on fire. Now let's look at the 3 questions. Number 1, Gibeah was a Benjamite city, and the men of Benjamin refused to deliver up their fellow tribesmen to justice. What is the relationship between loyalty to those with whom we are connected, family, friends, business associates, etc., and our loyalty to God and His commandments? Well, from a biblical standpoint, loyalty to God comes before a loyalty to family, blood family. Loyalty to God involves loyalty, however, to the family of God. Therefore, loyalty to the family of God takes precedent over loyalty to our genetic family. We are adopted into a new family. Jesus didn't necessarily come to bring families together, but when He came, He put families against one another, and we came out of our old genetic family and were adopted into the family of God, and that is the family we need to be loyal to. Verse 2, note the profound effect on the tribes of the sin of the men of Gibeah. It stabbed the people awake to the degree to which moral declension had progressed among them. And can you discover other factors which show that some good came out of the sordid chapter of events? Well, this tragedy brought unity to the remaining 11 tribes of Israel. At least did that. And it also caused them to rely on the Lord for their direction. The final question, how would you account for the fact that the 11 tribes were twice defeated by the Benjamites, even though they had asked counsel of the Lord? And what do you gather from chapter 20, verse 23 about their attitude? And was it a sign of weakness or of strength? Well, God was clearly testing the will of the remaining tribes and dealing with the sin of Benjamin with the severity that it deserved. They were perhaps unwilling to view their fellow Israelites as enemies of God. As to whether or not this was a weakness or not depends upon one's perspective. From the perspective of man, this would be considered a strength and considered a sign of love for their brothers. But from God's perspective, and that's really the only perspective that truly matters, this was a sign of weakness. As Jesus had clearly said, let the dead bury the dead. To be a friend of the world, it says in the book of James, is to be an enemy of God. So when the Benjamites committed this act, they actually became God's enemy, and if they were God's enemy, they were the enemy of the other 11 tribes who were not necessarily any longer their brothers in the Lord. That's the lesson we need to learn from this passage of Scripture. I hope that God is blessing you. I hope you're a part of a wonderful family of God. I hope this study in Judges is a blessing to you. Next time we will do the last chapter in Judges and then turn our attention, I believe, to the book of 1 Peter. Hope you're having a great day. God bless the rest of your day.